Hello and welcome. I'm Zach Lehmacher from Agile. We have got a great webinar for you today, and we appreciate everyone making the time to talk about this critical identity topic, which is modern identity management for non-employees. Now, if you've been in the identity management space for a long time, you'll be excited to see how much things have changed and how much the capabilities to solve non-employee identity problems really has evolved. We're honored to be partnered today with both SecZetta and SailPoint, and to be co-presenting with our friends from SecZetta. So let's take a couple minutes to introduce the team that's presenting today. Saramya, do you mind starting?
Sure. I'm Saramya Bakshi, Senior Manager at Agile. I primarily work in design and delivery of projects in identity access management and identity governance. I also manage different client relationships and the SecZetta relationship at Agile. I've been with Agile now for 6 years and live in Sacramento. Over to you, Jen.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Jen Kraxner. I'm a solutions advisor with SecZetta. I've been here for about a year based in the Denver area, but I actually spent many years prior as a consultant in the identity realm, working with organizations to really mature their identity programs. Now I focus those efforts largely on the kind of third-party non-employee identity challenges that we're facing and that we'll talk about today. I'm really excited to be here. Ben?
Hi everyone, I'm Benjamin Oild. I'm a consultant with Agile working out of Seattle. I've been with Agile for a little over a year now, and I work mainly in the identity space, working kind of on the ground with configuration engineering of Identity Now and SecZetta products.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. And as I mentioned before, I'm Zach Lehmacher. I'm here in Seattle, and I'm a managing director and leader in Agile's identity practice. I've been in information security for around 20 years or so, entering the industry first in the mobile and end user compute space, and then spending about 15 years as a tech and business architect in identity and directory services. So first as a technical director for Charles Schwab in San Francisco, and subsequently as a consulting practice leader and here at Agile. Our agenda is pretty straightforward today. First, we're going to find out more about who the non-employee workforce is and the identity governance and administration functions that we need to perform for them. Then we're going to dig into the unique problem space that non-employees present as compared to employees. And of course, we're going to talk about how we approach and solve the problem. Next, we will talk through a case study from one of our clients, and we'll illustrate some of the challenges that they were having and how they're going about managing non-employee access now. And then finally, we get the benefit of having a live demo of the solution, which should be great. So before we dig too far into the topic, if you aren't already familiar, I'll take a couple minutes to introduce Agile and our identity practice. At Agile, we are a strategy-first risk and security advisory and services firm. We were established in 2001 in the San Francisco Bay Area and are backed by a $3 billion private equity fund. We've got a national practice of deep specialists that are focused on establishing and maintaining long-term client relationships by really helping our clients be successful. Our consultants on average have more than 10 years experience spread across our 3 primary high-level service offerings, which are risk and compliance, cloud security and information protection, and all things identity and access management, which of course is our focus here today. So our world-class identity practice really focuses on providing valuable services to the most complex organizations and spans the full scope of identity disciplines. So that includes everything from identity governance and administration, we're talking about more today, to privileged access management and multi-factor authentication, PKI, and more. So really the full gamut of identity. Our business empowered approach and our GRC integration really ensures that we work on highest risk and highest impact items first, harmonize those regulations and controls and framework requirements, and that properly represent your success. We are a SecZetta and SailPoint Admiral partner, and fortunate to have the highest level of IAM architects and engineers and experts that really exist. Although we are a strategy-first organization, I wanted to point out that once that strategy is established, we really don't think there's anybody out there that's better at implementing, securing, managing, and maximizing the leading IAM software and products and processes in the industry. So, so Rami, do you want to take a second and set the stage for us on the topic today?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Zach. So let's look at what do we mean by identity governance and administration. And so if you look from the business perspective, right, the objectives are your resources should be productive on day one, and no one likes to waste time in getting access. But we all have been in that place where we just waited for a long time to get access to Active Directory or even pretty important critical applications. And another objective is to reduce risk. I mean, you don't want someone to linger access when someone is not working for you. So IGA means efficient management of your access for both employees as well as non-employees, and during their entire life cycle. So from the point they join till the point they leave the organization, or even in between where if there's a change in job title or a department, so access should change accordingly. If you look at some of the IGA functions, access provisioning, it means how can you get your users the required access to different target applications. So for example, Active Directory, Cerner, Epic, Salesforce, any ERP solutions. This can be done by automation. So as I mentioned, during new hire or any change in access, with the help of automation, your access also should change accordingly, which is also the access updates, where you change your job title, if you change your role in the organization, your access should change as well. Access request is, let's say someone is temporarily filling in for someone else, or if there's a reorganization, now you have maybe an extra additional responsibility or change in responsibility, then you can do is what's called ad hoc requests. So you can request for an additional access. And again, automation should help you give access to the connected applications to the IGA system. Access certification. What this means is review of access. Let's say if someone is within an organization, been in the organization for a long time, and has moved a lot within different departments and roles, now has a lot of access, and it just sort of gives them a super user or a bloating of access. Now, with the help of access reviews or periodic access reviews, what you can do is you can review and determine that if the access the person currently has is important for the job function they're doing, and then you can remove the access from their profile. Access aggregation, it means any IGA system can only function well if it is connected properly with different target systems, as well as the sources of truth, and is updated periodically. So if the information is stale, then again it defeats the entire purpose of having or the visibility of access. Now, if we go into who are these non-employee types we are talking about in this presentation, and again, this is not an exhaustive list. These are the just more common ones we have seen. So we are talking about the statement of workers. We are talking about vendors. We are talking about students, contractors. We also are including the non-human accounts, which could be service accounts, bots. And as I said, there could be different organizations may have different ways of naming their non-employee population, business partners, and so on and so forth. So to move us forward, I'll hand it over to Jen.
Thank you, Saramya. So what Saramya's just really gone through is, what is IGA? Who are non-employees? And I guess the topic of this webinar obviously is specific to non-employee management, right? And how we deal with their identities. And what we found, and I'm sure what many of you are aware of, is there are some gaps when it comes to managing non-employees as opposed to perhaps what we see most often with employees. And some of those gaps we'll talk about today and how to really address those. And specifically, you know, all of it very much stems around the fact that we don't have the same source of truth for non-employees as we do for employees. As you all are aware, you know, when you come into an organization as an employee, your information is really gathered and stored in an HR system, for example, right? And that system can be the source of truth for employee data, but most organizations really lack that when it comes to non-employees. So contractors or consultants or, you know, IT service vendors. And again, you know, even students or researchers, things like that, when you talk about different types of organizations. So lacking that system or that source of truth is really a pretty significant gap for many non-employee types. And what happens when you lack that source of truth is you also can't feed processes that are really necessary for their governance of their identities and their access. So that means it's difficult to have really well-defined deprovisioning processes. You know, we talk a lot about how nice it is to speed up the process of onboarding a person and get them the access that they need. And that's very, very good. And there's a lot of focus on that, but it's really important not to forget about deprovisioning that access when the time's right. Okay, so we need to have that, all of that data about those people in order to make sure that we know when they go inactive and when that access should be removed. And then also have a tool for automatically removing it, right, deprovisioning it. So right now that's a bit of a gap when it comes to non-employees as well. And then beyond that, you know, being able to request access when it's necessary, you know, anything beyond maybe birthright provisioning that might happen, you want to, you know, that's a very important consideration when it comes to being able to manage identities and access in general. You've got to, you know, really be able to understand who needs to request access and give them the opportunity to do so in a systematic way. That's again something that we see missing a lot for non-employee populations specifically. And then finally, you know, there are a lot of organizations run into audit findings, particularly when it comes to non-employee populations, because they aren't necessarily tracking that access in the same way that they do for the rest of their workforce, for their employee workforce. So there's a missing process for being able to review the access, right, and do those certifications that Saramya described. That doesn't exist in many cases for non-employees either. So, you know, how do we address these gaps? What are some ways to start moving towards maybe treating our non-employees with some of the same rigor that we treat employees with when it comes to collecting their information? Because when we talk about employees, we can really talk about a nice process for onboarding and their life cycle and their, you know, even when they retire or leave an organization. And that process really centers around an HR team. Okay, so we think about how they're hired and vetted and recruited, and that happens, you know, with the centralized team, the centralized human resources team, and they take all that information about those employees, gather it up, and put it into their HR system. So you have that HRIS or HCM that's containing all of that employee information that's proactively maintained by that HR department, right? That you know when a job title changes or when their manager changes or when they, you know, importantly, when they leave the organization, all that data is there. So when it comes to employee IGA, we can rely on this HR system and that data to feed systems like SailPoint in order to really connect this process from, you know, start to finish, allow SailPoint to have that system of record for employees and be able to properly govern the access that those employees are getting based on that data. Okay, so this is why, you know, why we don't see the same sorts of gaps for employees as we do for non-employees. Because when you think about the non-employee process, it's very different. Okay, so non-employees, you think about contractors or affiliates or partners or any of these folks that don't exist in that HR system, they come in a little bit different way. So quite often we start by vetting their organization. So you develop a relationship with this third-party vendor or with this affiliate, okay? And that relationship is formalized and, you know, the two organizations negotiate terms or sign agreements and understand potentially the risk that might be involved at that organizational level of doing business together, all right? Which is great. And there's a lot of really important information that's gathered at that point in the process. However, a time comes when folks from those organizations need to get access to resources, okay? So these external organizations send people in and say, okay, they need maybe an email address, or they need an AD account, or they need, access to some of these, the Cerners, the Epics, any system that they need to get access to in order to do their job. The process is a little different, right? There's no system of record. There's typically a lot of email strings, potentially phone calls, potentially help desk tickets, very decentralized and different depending on the type of non-employee. But the goal is eventually, hopefully, to get them into SailPoint, so at least their access can be governed appropriately. But quite often that doesn't happen because there's not that system of record like there is for employees. And what happens in this case is all that great vetting that you do at an organizational level doesn't pass through to those identities and the access that they have. If you've assessed the risk at the org level, you don't get the benefit of understanding that these people are attached to that risk. And you also don't get the benefit of understanding what risk those folks as individuals present to your organization. And that risk is important because we want to be able to drive their access and perhaps their certifications and even their authentication mechanisms off of how risky they may be to your organization. So this gap that exists here is where SecZetta fits in. So we're able to come in, automate the processes of onboarding different types of non-employees. So we don't, require everybody to follow exactly the same process that says, here's the, 10 fields that you're providing, the 10 pieces of information you're providing for these people. But, like I said, a contract physician needs to probably follow a different process than perhaps a student or a volunteer or a contractor would need to follow in order to be onboarded. So SecZetta can really contain all of those different workflow processes, all those life cycle processes, enforce policies during those processes, enforce required data that needs to be collected, and use all of this relevant data to build risk ratings for each individual so that we understand who we're engaging and who we're building relationships with at the individual level. So this is really the piece that SecZetta fits in that puzzle, and kind of closes that gap, obviously, between the org vetting and the actual provisioning of access. So there's another view we can kind of take of this, and this really shows a bit more how SecZetta and Identity Now specifically fit together. So SecZetta not only contains all of those life cycle processes that we talked about, but we're also a relationship engine. So it's extremely important for non-employees especially to understand who needs to contribute to the life cycle of that non-employee. For an employee, you think, okay, this is a manager, right? A manager contributes to it, or HR contributes to it, and that's pretty much it when it comes to their hiring and transfers and terminations. But for a non-employee, you might have a lot of different folks that need to play some part in that life cycle and that process, including sponsors, vendor managers, procurement team, a project team. And by the way, these folks aren't always internal to your organization, right? This non-employee has a manager out at their home organization that knows a lot about their status, with that firm. So SecZetta is able to really open that up, allow collaboration among all of the appropriate people in order to maintain this authoritative record. So we can provide, delegated and self-registration capabilities, which we'll go a little bit more into, particularly in the demo. But we support all of the onboarding and updates and terminations. We, also are able to do things like, hey, Bob is coming on board next week. Let's make sure Bob is who he says he is before we provision his access. So we can do identity proofing, okay, in a digital kind of remote way. Profile revalidations, extension actions, termination, all of that is very proactively maintained within that authoritative record for the non-employee. And what's important is that authoritative record can then be used by Identity Now to drive all the relevant actions from the identity cube, right? So that's accounts and access. It's, actually, I'll let Saramya go a little bit more into the Identity Now side of this, as that's his expertise.
Thanks, Jen. Also, you want to say that we have Identity Now today in the demo, and then we'll also talk about it a little bit more in the next slide. But this could be any other IGA solution, and it could also be the SailPoint's Identity IQ as well. So here, if you look at this architecture from the IGA system side or from Identity Now side, it's such a simplified architecture now. Instead of having to deal with 3, 4, 5 different sources of truth for these non-employees, now you have a one proper centralized source which feeds into Identity Now in this case, and then it can again trigger the new hire workflows, termination workflows, any other changes in the life cycle that those workflows can be handled. And now in the Identity Now, you can do all the core IGA functionalities on request any additional access or review of access. And the most important I see is visibility into if someone does not work for the organization or the home organization. Now that trigger gets into Identity Now, and then it can trigger a termination. So if you move to the next slide. So just a few minutes on Identity Now as a product, since we'll be showcasing that in the demo. SailPoint is the industry leader in the IGA space, and Identity Now is the multi-tenant cloud solution by SailPoint, and it has been consistently being upgraded to add new features and functionalities. We did talk about some core functionalities previously on provisioning, request access, and certifications. A couple more I want to talk about, which would be relevant now in the remote world. The important one is password management. I don't know how many times I have forgotten my password, and especially in these times, if you don't use the system quite often. So that would help you decrease your help desk costs, calls. I know a lot of the help desks anyways are extremely busy these days. Another advantage is it has a lot of AI capabilities. So it has access modeling or insights or recommendation engine, which basically helps you to understand, determine a proper role structure. You can scan through your organization and see what access people have, and then you can model roles based on that. Recommendation engine basically tells users about during access reviews if you have if someone has if it's a risky or a high risk entitlement or access, and it has been rejected by a lot of different managers for the same job title, then the recommendation will tell you that okay, this has been rejected by a lot of managers. So there's a lot of help to the reviewers and the managers to go through it. Again, it has a lot of capability. That's a cloud solution, so it has a pretty good connection with the different cloud solutions and applications. And if you want to know more on, so Agile has a Identity Now quick start guide, and if you want to know more, we'll have a link at the end of the presentation. I'll hand it over to Zach.
All right, thanks, Ramya. So we wanted to provide a case study to talk about this in real life before we see the demo and see how this goes. You'll see that this pattern follows a lot of the core problems and use cases that were discussed before, but in real life as this client experienced. So the client example we're talking about is a global healthcare organization, and as a lot of your orgs have, they've got very disparate group of thousands of contractors and many different types of folks necessary to run their business. And so before this solution, there really wasn't a single source of truth, certainly not for all of the different non-employee workforce members that are necessary to run their business. And so access was managed very manually, and that brought about a whole host of challenges. The three primary challenges being risk. So first of all, lots of scenarios given that complexity, not surprising, where a contract with someone had ended or expired and a manager hadn't submitted a timely access request, and as a result, someone's access lingered around longer than expected, causing issues with compliance as well as potentially with security. Second is manual labor. So with no self-service capability for agencies to make their own workers and needed to provide their services, they rely heavily on internal sponsors and internal people within the organization to enter that information for them, not to mention pass their personal information in some cases across insecure methods to get that done. And then third is productivity loss. So because of all this complex processes, not unusual at all for a contractor that, to be sitting on their hands a little bit and not able to do their work on day one because these processes take a long time or something was missed. So looking more towards their objectives, what they really wanted to accomplish and how they ended up with the solution that Saurabh will talk about here in a second, is that to solve those pain points, they have three objectives. First of all, really, they wanted to get to consistent information and processes. Secondarily, they wanted to reduce manual labor, so drive that efficiency factor up and both for cost, timing, and user experience. And then they wanted to reduce risk and stay in compliance. So, Saurabh, do you mind digging into each of these topics about how they more nature of the situation and how they accomplished their goals?
Yeah, sure. So Zach laid out the problems or the pain points the organization had and the objectives they were looking for. So how did our solution help into each objective? So with the SecZetta SailPoint or Identity Now solution, now you had one single source or centralized source for all the contractor information. Now managers, the hiring manager didn't have to go to different portals, or now actually they had a place to go and see what who their contractors and where they were coming from. It also allowed with the help of delegated administration from SecZetta, the vendor company could just directly create, update, or delete a lot of those contractor profiles. It also had an approval for the hiring manager, so it had a check on the hiring manager side to see and validate. So the most important piece was, I guess, having the visibility, and then SecZetta also provided reports and to see who was active, who was inactive. So that was pretty important on checking the visibility. So if we move to the next one, so this again, delegated administration. Now, it's not a burden on the hiring manager or his or her team now to add or at least manage those workers. Now, I think as Jen said before, that the vendor manager actually has way more information to actually add those details. And so if this was delegated to them, then this was delegated to the vendor administrator, that solved a lot of problems from the hiring manager side. If you go to the next one, this is again extremely important. I think Zach touched upon the problem of lingering access. So now, since there was an integration between SecZetta and Identity Now you could actually run you can run access reviews and then see if someone has an additional access or access which they should not have, and as I said before, maybe they stayed in the company for a long time to gain a lot of additional access and they were removed. So the periodic access removes could take care of that. Another issue was SecZetta would not trigger a termination or a contract expiration lifecycle event, which will now trigger a termination for these contractors. So again, you would not have to have unnecessary access for someone who is being terminated. So I think after this, I'll hand it over to Jen to go architecture.
Thank you. Yes, this will, we're gonna work a little bit here to really introduce you a bit to the demo as well. But this is just a real general overview of how SecZetta and SailPoint kind of interact and the different pieces that we kind of fulfill of the puzzle there. So, we've talked a lot about delegated and collaborative processes within SecZetta, because that's what's required, right? For non-employees, we've got to allow those vendor managers and the business line sponsor and potentially all of these other teams access into to help make sure that we have all the accurate information for those non-employees. So what this diagram here is really talking about is we provide that in two ways, right? We can provide this external portal for an agency or a third-party vendor to get access in and do things like onboard their own people, or even allow these guys to onboard themselves, so a self-registration capability as well. And so there's this external portal where they are able to go in and do a handful of things. Obviously, we don't want to allow them to do it all. And typically the way that works is those folks can go in and make requests and onboard people and trigger that process, provide all the information. And then we have a separate portal for the hiring manager or the sponsor or the identity team or the procurement team to go in and fulfill, approve, provide additional details, that anything that's relevant to those records, so that we have all that data gathered in one place. Again, that single kind of source of truth or system of record for those non-employees. And then we're able to really drive all of those processes and workflows from within SecZetta. And as we've already really talked about a little bit, right, we then have that repository of information, so SailPoint, and all the IGA processes and the access automation, all the governance, everything that they're doing, SailPoint can pull that non-employee information in to drive those processes in the right way and be very well informed about the non-employees. And that means taking all of that information, sending, provisioning and target applications, understanding exactly what access they need, potentially communicating with ServiceNow to open service desk tickets so that we can handle some of the potentially more manual processes of getting equipment ready or having badges created, right? There are all sorts of ways that SailPoint can then interact with those kind of target applications. And, I think I'll let Ben now go into a little bit here on this slide about, what we're going to see in the demo too.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. So before I jump into the demo, I want to actually use this slide to kind of give a bit of a frame for it. During the demo, you're going to see two different perspectives, actually. We're going to be using the perspective of Agile, who needs to manage these new non-employees, and the vendor, who we're calling Acme Consulting, where these non-employees are coming from. So Jen did a great job of describing how we have two separate portals to log in from, one for the non-employees to manage, and then one for us internally as Agile. And that's exactly where the demo is going to start. So I'm going to start on the left side here where the logins are. And I'm going to log in as Acme Consulting and request a new worker to be onboarded. And then I'm going to log in again as Agile to actually approve that. And then after that, I'll show how that all flows into Identity Now. So let me drag this over here to show you guys. This is our portal for logging in as Acme Consulting. And I'm going to log in as our delegated administrator. So here you can see the perspective of a delegated administrator from our Acme Consulting profile. And they've got a button here to request a new worker, and that's exactly what we're going to do. You can see all of the different profiles that are already currently in the system. So we're going to go ahead and request a new non-employee worker to be onboarded to Agile. And I'm going to go ahead and start filling out some information here. And you can see here, there's a lot of different things that can be added to this form. These forms are completely customizable. One thing that's really cool we can do here is what we've done here for the background check is that if they have a completed background check or a background check in process, we can actually ask for extra files to be uploaded to confirm that this background check actually happened. But for this demo, I'm just going to say one was not requested. And all of these attributes can also be used later to play into the risk score that is assigned to a user. I'm going to make myself the sponsor here, so then when I log in from Agile's perspective, I'll be able to approve it myself. And we're going to have them start today and go for a week. So here I've submitted the request. We can see the request has been submitted and it's in progress. So now I'm going to hop over to our other portal to log in from Agile's perspective.
Yeah, and quickly putting some context, if your organization, all that work that Ben just did, it's very typical for people to be passing that organization to your folks in order to accomplish that work, right? Which is time consuming, inaccurate, passing personal information, a whole bunch of other things. So pushing that out to the right person to do the right information and to delegate it to the right place is just a critical move forward in terms of these types of processes.
Thank you, Zach. So now that I'm logged in here from Agile's perspective, we can see that I actually have a new request that needs my action here. So I'm going to go here and click this pending my action button. And it looks like that Jen requested a new worker from Acme Consulting. So I'm able to review all of the information that was laid out on the form and either accept or reject this new worker. And we actually have it configured so there are some specific details that only me as an internal manager can actually add. So I'm going to go ahead and add these details. We're going to say that they're a remote worker. And then I'm going to go ahead and approve this request.
And I'll add just a little here as well. You know, that was a fairly simple onboarding process, right? And kind of a typical thing that we might see for contractors, but keep in mind that there are a lot of additional steps that can be supported in here. In many cases, things like credential checks, if you're bringing on a physician, for example, or you know, additional teams that might need to approve specific details about these folks that are coming in, even policy checks. This is where we can build in identity proofing, for example. So even when those processes for onboarding become more complex, those can still be supported specifically within SecZetta and can differ depending on which type of non-employee we're really dealing with.
That's a great point, Jen. Thank you. And now that we've actually got him onboarded, we can also see him here on the dashboard and look at his profile and all his information that we've got stored. And me as an internal manager, I actually have an option to terminate him right here, which we will come back to later. But for now, we're going to switch over to Identity Now and see how all this information has flowed there. So I'm on our source for SecZetta, which is our non-employee authoritative source. So this is our source of truth for non-employees in Identity Now, but we may have other sources, say from Oracle or anything else for our internal employees that are also being managed in the same system. But specifically, we're looking at the non-employees here and how they have a separate source of truth. So we can find the guy that we just onboarded here, Joshua Mills. And it looks like his information has already been transferred over to Identity Now here. And it's showing him as an active account. And you can see here that at the same time as we flowed his information over to Identity Now, he was also provisioned an Azure O365 account by Identity Now as part of the onboarding process. So this was just automatically done. And that now that he is in Identity Now, there are a bunch of things he can do. There's a request center. He can request access to different applications that he may need, or someone else can request access on his behalf. You can run certification campaigns can be run on his access to assure that the access he currently has is access that he should have. And all of these super important things for managing non-employees and the access that they have. So now that we've seen how his information has come to Identity Now and how it's automatically provisioned him a new account, we can come back to SecZetta and see what happens when it's time to actually terminate him. So let's go back to his profile. And it was Joshua Mills we onboarded here, and I'm going to go ahead and just terminate him. And of course, that can be configured to be more of an approval process or anything else you need as well. But for this demo, it's just going to be a quick termination. And now we're going to go back to Identity Now. Whoops. And we're going to head back to that SecZetta source of truth for non-employees and see how his account has changed. But first, of course, I have to actually tell it to pull the new information. And normally these are something that will happen on a scheduled basis. But of course, for the sake of a demo, I have to force the identity pull here. So once that completes in a couple seconds here, we should be able to see his information change. And you can see here now that we're looking at his profile, his life cycle state has gone to inactive. And if we go to his accounts, we can see that not only was his Identity Now account disabled, but his Azure O365 account was also automatically disabled along with his profile. So with this, you can really see how together Identity Now and SecZetta can really help with these gaps in managing non-employees and all of the access that they have. And I believe that is everything I had for the demo. And unless any of you guys have anything else you want to add, we can move on to questions.
Great, thanks a lot, Ben. So, and Jen, so seeing how all of these pieces fit together looks quite intuitive and straightforward. I think that the more contact and scar tissue and pain you've had with the previous processes before really give you insights into how transformational this is. We do have a fair amount of questions submitted that I'd like to get through here at the end. So why don't we go ahead and start to do some of that. So first question here, I think I will direct towards Jen, if that's okay. The question is, why would you use SecZetta instead of a vendor management solution such as Fieldglass?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, the kind of, I guess, quick answer is because SecZetta actually supports a much larger variety of non-employee populations and supports a much broader scope of workflows and data about those non-employees. So, you know, actually, quite honestly, SecZetta, we generally will integrate with vendor management solutions like Fieldglass because they do contain really fantastic information about third-party vendors and, you know, at the org level and potentially a little bit of information about certain non-employee populations. And we love to gather as much of that information as we can because it can be applied to those non-employees and their life cycle processes within SecZetta. But the bottom line really is, you know, there are systems, I mean, Identity Now, for that matter, Identity Now has some kind of limited capabilities when it comes to onboarding directly non-employees, right? You can, there's a form you can fill out and put some information in and get their identity and access governed and provisioned in that way. The reason that our customers bring SecZetta in is because they have such complexity in their non-employee populations and the processes that they need to go through that they need something purpose-built for that sort of complexity. Most of the time, other systems that might contain a little bit of non-employee data just don't go to the extent that we really need it in order to properly understand things like how they need to be onboarded. What do those processes need to look like? What kinds of approvals need to happen? What sorts of policy checks and licensure checks need to happen? And also, SecZetta is very focused on understanding risk at the identity level for non-employees. So we have a risk profile that we create for every profile, every non-employee that comes in, and that accounts for all sorts of different information that we're able to gather and really apply to build that risk score. And that, again, is something that you really don't get with any other solution, you know, beyond SecZetta. Great question, though.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. And I think that I had similar thoughts when I first started to interact with the product as well in certain spaces, and it's good to see that the likelihood, knowing that the ecosystem, the likelihood that another product is going to provide the same service to the same width of workforce and other things is very, very unlikely. And as a result, seems like the answer in many of these cases is you might want to have both. And certainly you're not going to displace those big systems that are there for a wide variety of other reasons, but that you probably need a SecZetta as well to tie the pieces together. Is that fair?
Yes, absolutely. Great point.
Awesome. Okay, second question here. I think I'll direct towards Ben. So this is about how long or difficult is an implementation of this type of solution?
So of course that's going to depend on the complexity of the solution that you need and maybe how many moving parts are involved in your system and everything you have set up. But I would say on average it would take about 2 to 3 months, really depending on really all those different moving parts you have.
Okay, gotcha. And Ben, is that assuming in this scenario that you already have an IGA solution out there and you're looking to improve your non-workforce management portions of it?
Yes, I would definitely put that on the lower end of the time spectrum if that's already implemented for sure.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, so calling out that that's a considerably, as far as identity related solutions goes, that's a pretty good time to value and less lift than a lot of the other solutions that we need to implement and and onboard lots of applications too, and all those types of things. Jen, here's another one I think that seems like it'd be good for you. So how many delegates are you allowed to bring into the system?
Yeah, as many as you need, right? So when it comes to who is the best person to provide information about their non-employees, right? Whether that's the vendor delegate is quite often that person. And not only that, but these non-employees themselves need to provide self-service, and that's in a way a delegating of the ability to manage their life cycle. So however many you need to bring in order to make sure we're getting the right data and having the right people perform the right approvals and requests and tasks, that you can bring them in. And further, even beyond that, we saw the Acme Consulting vendor portal during Ben's demo. And those portals, even, you set up as many of those as you need. So you can have a single portal where all of your non-employees go and even your vendor delegates can go in order to manage their people, or you can set them up per organization. So in that case, Acme Consulting had that portal to go manage their people, right? But any other third-party vendor that might need that capability can have their very own portal and, essentially a completely separate place where they can go and provide that information. And even those portals are, SecZetta is a very flexible, configurable solution, and even those portals take minutes to set up in the system. As you sort of add those vendor relationships, you're able to quickly spin up their portals so that they can manage their own folks.
Excellent. Yeah, that makes complete sense. And we have a follow-up question. You touched on it a little bit, but wanted to go back to one of your questions earlier. So someone asked, why do I need SecZetta if I can build a non-employee workflow within IIQ, for example, Identity IQ by SailPoint?
Yeah, you want me to take that one?
Yes, please.
Sure. So yes, absolutely. There are non-employee workflows you can build within Identity IQ. There's also, kind of as I mentioned, that Identity Now, supports a little bit of that as well. However, specific to Identity IQ, the problem with relying on a non-employee workflow in IIQ is that workflow is kind of heavy, right? If you build a form in Identity IQ to manage some of this, there's a lot of effort in building it, number one, and number two, there's a lot of effort in maintaining that. And number three, that's one workflow that needs to support potentially dozens of different types of non-employees. So when you do that in Identity IQ, you're really kind of getting painted into a corner where everybody has to follow that same process, right? You're not able to do things like open that up externally to those third-party vendors either. So there are just a lot of complexities that doing that within Identity IQ won't solve for. So if that, if you have any sort of complexity around those non-employees, which we find that nearly every organization has, it's just not a sustainable way to manage those life cycles. But I'd love, Zach or Saramya, for you to kind of provide your thoughts on that as well.
So I can maybe add a bit to what Jen said, and someone who has built a lot of forms in Identity IQ and others in Agile as well. We know that again, it's time consuming and it's effort intensive to create forms and actually create those workflows. And having seen SecZetta workflows, it's way more easier on that front. And maintenance is, again, I agree, is a huge pain point.
Yeah, and in a large complex organization, these types of things add up, so definitely this is not a displacement of the need for industry leading tools such as SailPoint IIQ, but as you're moving up the maturity ladder and you're gaining maturity and want insights into risk and other things like that, it's tough to argue. Once you look into the functionality, it's tough to argue that this isn't functionality that is necessary to add value.
Also, Zach, if you look at the management or the ownership of the functionality side, a lot of organizations want these HR-like functions to be separate from the identity services team, who generally own the Identity IQ product or the IGA product. So this also gives you separation of duties or separation of tasks.
Yeah, exactly. Great points. So we've got more good questions coming in. So I want to move on. We could probably spend more time on this topic, but let's move on to at least a couple more. Maybe we can even get 3 or 4 in. Jen, here's a question for you again. So is there an out-of-the-box process to handle contractor to employee or the other way conversions?
Yes, so technically all of our workflows are out of the box. First, I'll say that, right? Our solution is, so SecZetta is a configurable drag and drop workflow engine when it comes to building those things. So any process, including conversion workflows, so contractor to employee, employee to contractor, we support those processes in a way that is really about coordinating data among systems, right? Because when somebody goes from a contractor to an employee, the ideal thing to do would be, let's trigger that process from within SecZetta. Potentially get some approvals if that's necessary, drive some of those different, are they allowed, are they qualified, do they have some sort of, process? There's some piece of that process that might prevent them from doing that based on approvals. But once we get those approvals, we can then take their entity information, their profile information, and hand it off to an HR solution, right? So we can actually let that HR solution know, here's this person, they're converting to an employee, please, let's build out that event and their record within the HR solution based on data we already have. And the nice thing about that is you can link up their history with the organization and understand that they were a prior contractor, and if there are unique identifiers, IDs, things like that need to pass over in order to properly understand within your IGA solution that these are the same people, we can coordinate that sort of communication. And the same goes, if a workflow or a conversion process can be triggered in your HR solution, that can be sent as an API call to SecZetta to trigger an onboarding workflow as a contractor if they're going from employee to contractor. So, that communication is all out of the box. Their API communications back and forth, and certainly the workflows themselves are just something that has to be configured in the solution. Great question, though, and something we see a lot of.
Excellent. Yeah. Thanks. That's a great answer. Anything else that Saramya or Ben that you want to add to that? That I think that pretty much covers it.
Yeah.
I think that covered it.
Okay, great. Okay, so given the time, I think let's take one last question here, which also I'm going to direct towards Jen, given what it is. So question is, when you say in the presentation, verify physicians' credentials, how exactly would that be done? And also, could it support identity proofing in general, things like, you know, verifying social security number or other types of identity vetting?
Yes. So again, really, you know, the answer to the last question kind of applies to this too. All of these things, identity proofing and credential verification, those are typically, you know, done via API calls, number one. So let's talk first about credentials, okay? And this can apply to any sort of, you know, physician credentials, but there's also licensing required in a lot of other realms. And whenever there is some sort of licensing or credentialing step when you're onboarding someone, or even when you're verifying that they can still practice medicine or that they can still, you know, service some IT resource, we can support those verifications either via API calls to the credentialing systems. So for physicians, you know, you think about Echo or Cactus or MDStaff, any of those systems that we can reach out and talk to and get that approval system from the system directly, we can do that via API. We also support those quite often, you know, in the healthcare realm, there's a team that's doing more than just verifying a credential. They're also checking references, or they're, you know, making sure that this person, you know, their relationships that they have at different organizations are valid. If that's the case, we can also support that with more of a workflow task that's assigned out to that team at a healthcare organization. So there are different ways we do credentialing for our customers, and those are a couple of them. Now, identity proofing, we actually have, there's a step that you can add to an onboarding workflow or a validation workflow or any of the workflows in the system that will do digital identity proofing. And it's not social security number necessarily. This is actually a process of requiring the person to take pictures of a government ID, a picture of themselves, you know, to biometrically verify that the person on the other end of this device is the person on the identification, and the data on that identification per whatever government system repository we're communicating with, that the data on that identification matches the data they provided to us during their onboarding process, to make sure that all of that is, you know, copacetic and everybody is who they say they are before actually moving them forward in an onboarding process, which, you know, those are really particularly important right now. So many folks are working remotely and we don't ever see them in person, and, you know, particularly non-employees and third-party vendors that might have access to sensitive systems. Don't we want to, you know, really make sure that they are, in fact, you know, that in fact is Joshua Mills before we give him that remote access? So, no, great question, and I could obviously go on and on about that topic.
I was gonna say, truthfully, this topic would make a great roundtable discussion or other things of that nature. We're going to tie things up now because we're exactly at the end of the hour. So I really wanted to thank our panelists and presenters for your time, and thank everyone for your time in coming and spending your hour with us today. If you have any questions about this or need follow-up, you have our centralized Agile contact here, info@agile.com. And of course, do not hesitate to contact Saramya or myself directly with our email addresses here. And we'll make sure we're in very regular contact with Jen and Ben and everybody else to make sure we get you exactly what you need. But we will also answer any other questions that we weren't able to get to offline and make sure we have connection on those. So thanks very much, and hope you have a good rest of your day.